Welcome to me, where suspenseful, thrilling, and mysterious stories will draw you into a world where the lines between reality and fantasy seem to blur. When the night falls, when all the sounds gradually quiet down, leaving only your own heartbeat and breathing, that's when these stories begin. Tensions, unsolved mysteries, moments that will make you hold your breath in fear or curiosity, all are waiting for you ahead. Find a comfortable seat, dim the lights, and let this sound guide you on a journey that is not for the faint of heart. I want each of you to leave a comment sharing where you are in the world. And if you are enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel now. Relax. Are you ready? If so, join me in the first story right now. In flight. Meal. Leo was not a fan of flying. Not like this. Sitting quietly with strangers in an enclosed space. Like he was back in the classroom. That was one of his ideas of hell. He had many ideas of hell, and very few of heaven. He made sure her was one of the first passengers on the plane. He took his seat with no fuss and no nonsense, and then did his best to weather the storm of humanity around him. He tried the breathing technique his therapist had taught him, and he also tried zoning out. Neither worked. A voice in his head was screaming at him to leave. Anything was better than this. Screw the deal. Just get off the plane and go home. Maybe Jimmy was right. They should buy the Vibe Bar, change its name to something far cooler, and live the simple life. Leo's Bar. Thoughts of the bar helped calm him for a little while, but then he realized that his ambition was taking the concept to places that were far from simple. Leo sighed. Jimmy would make that bar work. He really would. But then Leo would come along, interfere, and fuck it up. And the worst of it was that Jimmy would smile sweetly and let him ruin everything. Sometimes Leo wondered whether he wasn't wired right, that maybe he'd been dropped on his head as a baby, or his mother had had a secret drug habit. Leo was never settled or content. Nothing was ever good enough. Or if it seemed like it was, it soon turned into the brown stuff and stunk to high heaven, meaning Leo had to move onto pastures new before the shit stuck to him, and he was the one stinking the place up. Somehow, he lost himself somewhere in his thoughts and self-absorption, thankful of the respite. Barely taking in the safety briefing, he came to himself as the plane accelerated down the runway, and he was pressed down into his seat as they traveled skyward. He enjoyed this bit, but it also terrified him. There was nothing natural about being propelled into the sky. He tried not to consider the landing. It was the landing that could kill you. Hit the ground hard enough, and it was all over. He blew out a breath and closed his eyes. He kept them closed as he mulled the deal. This was the big time. Once he'd done this deal, he'd be a different animal, and the Vibe Bar would be far beneath him. He was a player now. Things were on the change, and people better take note. They would have to take note. He'd make sure of it. "Drink, sir?" The question fazed him, but he quickly returned to himself, ordering a bourbon, then making it a double. As he poured his drink into the crappy plastic cup, he tuned into the interaction between the air hostess and the passenger sat next to him. The voice was what caught his attention. There was no mistaking the owner of that voice. If Leo were to turn and gawp at the woman next to him, he knew that he would find her attractive. Maybe too attractive. Leo's measure of too attractive was not misogynistic. He applied the same rule to man and beast alike. Beautiful people could be really up themselves and manage to be a pain in the ass at the same time. Leo had experienced this and had no time for it. Mostly, he had no time for it. There was always room for exceptions, and she turned out to be yet another of the exceptions. "Hey," he said as he turned to greet her. "I'm Leo." She smiled and nodded. "I'm Grace." "Nice name," he told her. And for once, he thought he might mean it. There followed a silence that could have been awkward, but instead was filled with anticipation, or at least was as far as Leo was concerned. "I don't usually," he began, but trailed off as both the words and the sentiment felt off kilter. "I bet that's what you say to all the girls you sit next to on a plane," she said, with a hint of humor in her voice. That voice. There was something cathartic about it. Not only that, her very presence was doing something to him. Some things. He was regressing. A young boy around the babysitter. A pretender to a throne he never thought he would ever sit on. His body was fizzing, and his brain was spinning, so that he couldn't think straight. "So, Leo," she said, "what is it that you do?" That last word was heavy with meaning, but he could not discern it. "I'm a businessman," he replied. The problem with the dog-eat-dog world of business is you have to piss a few people to get anywhere. Am I right? She was smiling. He nodded. Seemed impossible not to. Trick is not to piss the wrong people off, she said in a quieter tone. Leo paused for a moment, his face a question. It were almost as though she knew something that he didn't. But how could she? She was just a stranger on a plane, and this was small talk to pass the time as they lingered in the limbo of this uncomfortable travel. Then she casually placed her hand on his thigh, and everything took a sharp right turn. I find flying so dull. Now she was barely whispering. Don't you? Not so much so now, Leo replied. Grace grinned at him. There was something overtly sexy about that grin. It sent a thrill up Leo's spine. The sensation was heightened as Grace's hand stroked higher up his thigh, and he found himself wanting more, wanting so much more. Your business? She asked, her voice stroking the back of his neck, in time with her hand on his thigh. "Is it dangerous?" "Very." His own voice felt thick and stilted. He was inexplicably drowsy, but his senses felt heightened. Her touch was electrifying him. "I walk on the wild side." He wasn't sure why he'd told her that. Wild side? They weren't even his own worlds. "I knew it!" she said excitedly, her hand going all the way up his inner thigh and resting exactly where he had hoped it might. "You're a very naughty man, aren't you?" Naughty? Was he? If anyone else had asked him this question, he'd have put them in their place. But with her, it was different. It was like she was royalty, a bona fide princess, the sort you couldn't refuse. And he wasn't going to refuse her when she was working magic on him with that hand of hers. Couldn't react badly with where her hand was right now. "I have been known to be naughty." He struggled to say the words as an involuntary gasp threatened to intermingle with them. "In that case, I think you better ask for a blanket." Grace gave him a playful squeeze. She was leaning in towards Leo now. He felt her breath on his earlobe and neck. "Sure," he said, and duly obliged. "That's better," purred Grace as she spread the blanket over Leo. The armrest was up and out of the way now. "This business of yours, it's criminal, isn't it?" "Can be," Leo replied, as Grace moved closer to him and nuzzled his neck, sending waves of pleasure through him. The anticipation was building, and he was reeling from this turn of events. He was no longer enduring a painful flight. He was enjoying a mile-high tryst. "Oh, look, you're bleeding." Her words took too long to sink in. He responded instead to her hand, leaving him and taking his wrist instead. There was a smear of blood, but he hadn't noticed any pain or act that could have caused the slight wound. "Here, let me." He watched as she lapped at the bloodied skin on his wrist. However slow he'd been with what she'd been saying, his body responded quickly and fully to this. She was sending waves of pleasure through him, and his imagination was going to the best of places, even before she began kissing and then sucking at his flesh. He'd never known pleasure like it, never realized how sensitive his wrists were. They sat like that for a while, Grace lapping and kissing him as he looked on, Leo doing his best to stifle his moans and hold himself back. The way he was responding to her, it was like his first time, but he had decades of experience to bring to the party. Something so simple as kissing his wrist. Who knew? And if she could have this effect on him as she did this, what further pleasures awaited? He was disappointed when she stopped, resisting the urge to ask her not to cease, putting a hold on begging her for more. Instead, he went for small talk, to disguise his blatant need for her. "What do you do, Grace?" he asked, as she slipped her arm around him and drew closer to him. Her hand was wrapped around him now. It felt so good. He barely registered her having undone his belt and trousers, losing his touch, drowning out the dissenting thoughts, going with it. He'd seen plenty of action before today, but not like this, not with a woman like Grace. And she was doing things to him that he didn't know were possible. He wanted her more than any woman he'd ever met. Wanted to give himself over to the pleasure he knew she could so readily bestow. Her voice, her presence, it had spoken of this, drawn him in. Now she was fulfilling the promise that was made as soon as they'd taken their seats on this flight. A chance encounter that was blowing his mind to pieces as she stroked him and pleasured him. She answered his question with that voice of hers. "I deal with the naughty boys. I eliminate risks," she breathed into his ear. "And you've been a very naughty boy. Fran Johnstone is not happy with you going behind his back with this deal of yours." His eyes widened in shock, but he barely had time to let the words sink in before her teeth sank into his neck. His back arched, and he wanted to protest, to struggle, but it was already too late for that. Too late for Leo. Grace took her time and enjoyed her in-flight well. These business trips were very lucrative for an assassin with her skills and proclivities. Less so for loose cannons like Leo. 2 monsters, Anatolius's home had been destroyed. Apart from the crackling of fires, still eagerly munching at the dregs of what used to be beautiful greenery, the island was silent. Anatolius might not have noticed the army behind him, were he marching on an adjacent kingdom. This kingdom, his kingdom, had been razed. Every home they passed was either a pile of ashes or the blackened husk of a stone wall. Anatolius pressed on. Nepheli had to be okay. She'd been alone with Anacreon for 6 years. He still had to apologize for that. He remembered the linen sheets she'd wrapped around their boy as she carried him. The boy with her blue eyes and the golden hair Anatolius himself had been born with. Hair that would by now be darkening to a soft brown. He'd been looking forward to catch up with them, with the goings-on of the kingdom, with the childhood he'd missed out on. As they walked through the town, he heard several of his men cry out. The sounds of weapons dropping to the stone roads and the sound of feet racing off. Several corpses dotted the paths. Most were burned beyond recognition, but a few wore helms bearing a crest that had been melted by the heat. None of his men, of course. Some army that had sacked the place, but some didn't wear armor. Anatolius was trying not to think about that. He had to see to Nepheli first. He had to. His sandal hit an uneven patch of stone in the path, and he stopped. Behind him, the sounds of his army rustled to a stop. No, he stumbled forward, the dying light of the day casting long shadows that blended with the soot-blackened stone, as if to trick him into thinking that it was supposed to look like this. The courtyard was in disarray. The once beautiful gardens that Nephili had so meticulously tended to were reduced to cinders. The 2 cypress trees at its entrance, little more than stumps. A bench lay in a heap of broken stone. The doors, at first glance, were open, though taking another trembling step forward, Anatolius realized there was no door in the hollow mouth leading into what was once his home. "Sir," Anatolius jumped. He'd thought most of the men had run off, seeing to their own homes, but Theodoros stood behind him, standing to attention. His eyes were hard, as if he were pretending to be blind to the destruction. Theodoros had fled his home, a country to the south, one with gods like Niam and Anansi, rather than Zeus and Hermes. He remembered helping the man out of a shipwreck when they were boys, making a comment about being surprised he'd survived the wrath of Charybdis, and realizing the boy couldn't understand his words. He didn't even have the language to tell Anatolius his name. Theodoros was the name they'd given him in Liu, and the name that had stuck. Apart from Anatolius, he didn't really have a family here. "Theo," he said, stepping forward. He'd intended to make it a long, confident stride, but his foot skidded in the ash and rubble. "You don't have to see this. I must," he said. His eyes grew soft as he regarded his king. "If only to keep you on your feet." Anatolius frowned at him, then took a deep breath and nodded. He ducked into the doorway. The humble palace was illuminated by a wide hole in the wall, breaching through the ceiling of the upper floor. The smell of charred flesh, stale after days of abandonment, still hung faintly in the air. Anatolius pulled up his cloak to cover his nose. "There could be survivors," he said doubtfully. "Check the cellars. Someone could have hidden there from the fire. I'll go check my bedchambers." Theodoros opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, giving his king a nod. He ducked into the kitchen and disappeared from view. Anatolius put one foot on the bottom step, taking a deep breath to steel himself, regretting it immediately as the odors seemed to coagulate in his nostrils. He readjusted his cloak about his nose and headed up the stairs, dreading what he'd find at the top. They could still live, he tried to reassure himself. If they're not up here, Theo might find them in the cellar. Perhaps Anacreon was hiding between the wine barrels when they came. He paused on the steps. They? Who was they? The city had been burnt to the ground intentionally. There were dead soldiers among the townspeople. But who on earth would have this big a problem with him? He almost turned around to go find one of those dead soldiers and examine the corpse more thoroughly. But he shook his head and took another step up. "Don't distract yourself," as his words echoed in the still air. He froze. The sound of something rustling in the rooms overhead were distinct now. A scuttling of feet and fabric. Someone was here. One hand on the hilt of his zyphus, he charged up the stairs. It could be Nepheli, but it could be someone else entirely. He threw his shoulder through the remains of the door, barging into his rooms amid a shower of soot. He then froze. His chambers, now a single room with the walls burned or knocked over, were destroyed. He shook his head, refusing to let himself be distracted by the destruction, and turned to the bed. Their bed. His blood ran cold. Nepheli, thin and gaunt, staring at him in disbelief and fear, lay in the bed. At first, he thought she must be tied there, with how little she moved. But as she lifted her trembling hand, he realized she was simply too weak. With effort, she outstretched a finger to point at him. No, not at him. Behind him, he spun in one fluid motion, drawing his sword. Initially, he saw nothing but the darkened corner of the room, blackened by shadows and soot. Then a low, dark chuckle echoed, and two glowing pinpricks of red appeared from the void. And here I was, half expecting her to die before you arrived, said a smooth voice, a shape separating itself from the shadows and resolving into a strange figure. It stepped forward, some kind of humanoid relative of Chimera, Anatolius thought. Its legs were smooth, dark red, scaled things, talons clinking on the stone floor between the tattered remnants of a pelt. The long, thin end of a reptilian tail whipped around. The figure's face remained in shadow, apart from its eyes, but Anatolius could just make out the shape of their head, adorned with wicked horns that swept back and arched up into points like some cruel wave. "Who are you?" he demanded in horror. "Not what?" The being chuckled, bringing a hand up to rest on their hip. It had those same dark red scales, same hooked black talons, clashing with the clean white of the creature's exomus. Most people ask me, what? I've had many of these conversations, King. Yet you're the first to ask after my identity first. I'll commend you on that. I know what you are. You're a monster. You brought your army here to destroy my people, and I will know why. Speak. The figure, infuriatingly, remained still. Another chuckle rumbling in their chest. Anatolius could practically hear Nepheli's bones vibrating as she trembled in fear or exhaustion. perhaps both. What had this thing done to her? "It's quite close to dark," they said, drawing his attention back. "Are you certain you want to strike now?" "What's that supposed to mean?" he shot back. One more dark chuckle. One more tremulous heartbeat. The sun was barely a blood-stained sliver cresting the windowsill. Then it was gone, the light dying from the room. The figure swept toward him. Only his reflexes saved him, his foot swinging out as he pivoted, trying to catch the creature unawares. The first thing Anatolius had learned in war was that a soldier's sword wasn't his only weapon. An instant later, he was staring at the ceiling through star-clouded eyes, wheezing for breath. The creature's tail tip unwound from his ankle, and the thing stepped over to look down at him, a silver grin cracking the violet dusk light. "You should have gotten her, and gotten out," they said, and lunged down at him. Cat. Pain greeted him as he woke. Head muddled, he groaned, reaching up to rub at a crick in his neck. A hand grabbed his wrist, and he cursed under his breath. "That thing, let go!" The words, though attempted to be forceful, came out as a pained hiss. He glared up at the figure above him, reaching for his sword. A moment later, he realized it wasn't the thing from earlier, but a more familiar face. Theodoros. Anatolius relaxed. "What happened?" Theodoros loosened his grip on his wrist, readjusting to help Anatolius sit up. There was a pain in his eyes, Anatolius realized. Or was it guilt? He shook his head to clear it, feeling a lot like he was nursing a hangover without having drunk the wine. "I am sorry, Your Majesty." Anatolius looked around the room. It was still in the same disheveled state as before, only now a huddled mass lay on the ground beside him. The creature, he realized. Its tail was still coiled lightly around his leg, but it lay in a puddle of blood. And Anatolius realized with shock that the sword whose handle he'd been reaching for was buried in its chest. Looking over the thing now, it seemed so much smaller, so much less imposing. He could see its face clearly now. Nearly human, but for a dusting of crimson scales across its cheeks. Had they been that bright before? Or had he been imagining it in the distorting shadows of the encroaching night that collected in patches around the outside corners of its hollow silver eyes, framing its face? It was a woman, too. More sets of horns studding her jawline, almost like facial hair. Her mouth hung open, revealing a set of fangs whose tips were dipped in blood. Anatolius reached up again, and this time Theodoros didn't stop him as he reached for that crick in his neck. No, not a crick, he realized, hissing in pain as his fingertips brushed a set of puncture wounds. "This thing, what is it?" he asked as he dropped his hand, looking up at his friend. Theodoros shook his head. He didn't know. Anatolius stood, feeling dizzy and weak as he got to his feet. He looked over to the bed, toward the unmoving lump under the sheets. Theodoros got up, but if his intent was to help, he moved too late, as Anatolius stumbled to the side of the bed and fell to his knees beside it. His wife, her once beautiful face now sunken in and bloodless, stared with dead eyes back at him. He reached up with trembling hands, one hand cupping her cheek, the other reaching for her hand. It was still outstretched, with the pointer finger out. She must have used the last of her strength to try and warn me, he thought, leaning up to kiss her forehead as tears collected in his eyes. Without looking up, he said, "Where is my son?" Theodoros was silent for a long moment. "I found him in the cellars," he finally said. "Dead? The smoke must have killed him." Theodoros usually sounded stern. Even in battle, he'd never cracked. But he loved Anatolius's family just as much as he himself did. And now, their loss had broken something in him, if the pain in his voice was anything to go by. Anatolius took a deep breath, then stood, still holding his wife's hand. The night before he'd left for war, he'd promised to return. He'd promised to her worried tears that she'd see him again. That promise had been fulfilled, but it felt hollow now. A sudden rage seized him. He dropped her hand. Then, despite his weakness, he stormed to the side of the creature who had attacked him. The thing that had ransacked his kingdom, destroyed his home, murdered his people and his family. He reached out and ripped the sword from her chest, scoring it down her belly to upend her innards onto his floor. "How dare you!" he snarled. Blood arced as he swung the blade down, then sprayed out as he drove the blade into the dead monster again. "How dare you! How dare you! You God's damned rat! You disgusting wretch! I was loyal to the gods. I commanded an army. I destroyed my enemy. How dare you spit in my face like this?" With each heartbeat, he swung the sword again and again and again. Blood drenched the floor, splattered the walls, and soaked up the ash from the fire, coating his clothing in sprays of red and black. A bit of it got in his eyes, his mouth, as he screamed his defiance. He didn't care, even as he tasted it going down. He didn't stop until the body was unrecognizable. Chunks of meat decorated with once fine fabric and putrid viscera. Even then, he didn't want to stop. But his fatigued muscles gave out, his arms refusing to lift the blade. He glared at the thing, the only bit of it still vaguely intact, its mouth, still agape. Then that mouth closed and smiled at him. "So you accept," came a voice, though the lips didn't move further. He blinked, about to turn to Theodoros to ask if he'd heard it too, then froze. Anatolius was no longer in his room. He looked around, finding a field devoid of color. He spun sluggishly, wondering if he'd threat of exhaustion. If he was about to be approached by Karen and guided by Fairy to join his family. For a moment, he hoped so. Then a sound echoed. A footstep. A figure did approach him, but not the figure of the god he expected. A familiar figure with lizard's legs and a thin, whip-like tail. He hissed and crouched down, sword ready, and lunged forward with a strength he thought had abandoned him. "Wrong way, King," said the woman's voice. Snidely, he whirled on her, slashing once more with his blade. Again, her voice was behind him, though this time it was an exasperated sigh. "Maybe I won't tell you what you've done to yourself. It's more fun to imagine your despair from Tartarus. Anyway," he turned, though this time confusion stayed his hand. "What I've done to myself." The creature gave him a flat look, clearly disappointed. "Yes, you could have let me kill you. I came to your kingdom, destroyed it, slowly drained your wife, and let your son choke on his own death in the cellar. And you didn't bother to ask me why. I'm insulted, Your Majesty." He curled his lip. "Why would I want to know why? You deserve death." "Oh, I'm already dead. Good job on that, too. Though if you'd been a little quicker, you might have escaped." "What?" He paused. She'd opened her mouth, tongue tracing his blood off her fangs. He reached up, finding the wound she'd given him, though in this strange place, touching the area didn't hurt. "I've made you immortal," she said smugly, hands on her hips. "That wasn't my goal, though. I am very old, Anatolius. I was hoping to die. I was just glad for a little fuss on my way out." "Why seek me out for that?" he demanded, hand still on the wound, as if by covering it, he could avoid the immortality she promised. Something told him it wasn't the immortality he might have wanted. "I've heard of the wars you Greeks wage," she said conversationally. Lifting one hand from her hip, she cupped the air, and Anatolius jumped back as a lithe flame danced in her palm. "I carry a power to make them more destructive, as made evident by what I did to your home. The power of one creature's rage. I did not bring those soldiers, Anatolius. That was one of your allies, sending their army to defend your people. They failed. You..." His mouth went dry. "You did all this on your own?" She grinned, crooking her fingers around the flame in her hand. Upon closer inspection, that flame was bigger than it appeared. Bright orange, bleeding into a pinkish hue, and then darkening to black as they curled around her cruel grin. "That was my power, Anatolius. And now it's yours." She swept forward soundlessly. Then, suddenly, her hand was on his chest. the tips of her claws digging into his flesh and caging the flame against his skin. He screamed, but before he could swing his sword again, she'd pressed it into his chest. Everything became blinding pain. The fire seemed to consume his heart, then flood through him along the paths of his veins, setting him alight. That strange flame morphed him into a human-shaped bonfire. Everything was flame. All he knew, everything he'd ever known, was that flame. It burned away every bit of him, leaving a smoldering hunk of coal in his place. Within himself, he saw two faces. His wife smiling at him, her dazzling beam burning away the memory of her dead in her bed. That of a young boy, older than he'd known his son, but undoubtedly him all the same, grinning playfully up at him through the mess of curls on his head. Though made of that flame, he reached out, pulling the both of them into an embrace. When he woke again, once more looking up at his own ash and blood-flecked ceiling, once more with Theodorus's face looking with concern down at him, there were tears in his eyes. Anatolius's home had been destroyed. Car radio. The silence is deafening. Finley stares at the empty slot where the radio should be. The hole in the center console mocks him. The engine roars and jumps to life. Finley laughs at the power and presses the gas pedal. The engine responds and races down the street. He sighs and shrugs off the silence. At least it's a nice car, he thinks to himself. Finley grips the steering wheel tighter and continues to drive. He's never driven a convertible before. The large amount of snacks sits in the passenger seat. 3 bags of chips, several candy bars, a meat stick, a couple of grape sodas, Red Bull, and an orange Gatorade are piled into a small mountain next to Finley. There is also $437 in his pocket. Finley glances at the convenience store in the rear view mirror as he drives away. The gun wasn't loaded, but the clerk behind the desk didn't need to know that. She graciously gives up her drawer in exchange for her life. Finley smiles as the memory of the robbery passes through his head again. "Everything in the drawer, now," he shouts. The clerk cries, but nods in understanding and opens the register. Ding. This is much easier with a gun, thinks Finley. He grins under his mask. He holds the basket of snacks in his free hand and points the gun at the clerk. Ida is the name on her shirt. She's short with straight black hair and small eyes. Tears run down her cheeks as she collects the bills. With a shaky hand, she gives the money to Finley. "Thank you," Finley decides to say. He runs out the store and watches as a Chevrolet Corvette pulls up to the store. An older gentleman shuts off the engine and opens the door to get out. He sees the gun before he sees Finley. "Give me the keys," Finley says loudly to the man. The elderly man jumps in surprise and quickly hands the keys to Finley. Finley dumps the basket of snacks into the passenger seat, puts the car in reverse, and drives down the road. When he is clear of the scene, he pulls off his mask and tosses it on the floor. He goes to adjust the radio, but the dial isn't there. The whole compartment is empty. Finley is an average man with an average build. His curly locks meet his eyebrows and licks his earlobes. His eyes are wide and too big for his narrow face, close together with long lashes. Stubble on his chin creeps its way up to his sideburns. The long bridge of his nose flares into broad nostrils, and his big pink lips pushes out from his face. He has a birthmark in the shape of a small diamond under his left eye. His cheeks are freckled and covered with a thin layer of dirt. Finley prefers Xbox over PlayStation and drinks apple juice more than a grown man should. He hates roller coasters because he has to sit next to strangers. He loves school, but dropped out his senior year. Finley is passionate, creative, and extremely intelligent. Finley wasn't always a thief, but the worst in his life brings out the best in him. Did I forget to feed Edison? Finley thinks to himself. Edison is his pet goldfish, who spends his days in a sphere on Finley's nightstand. Finley's hamster died in a freak vacuum accident when he was in kindergarten, and since then, he was against pets. Edison was a prize Finley had reluctantly won at a carnival. So far, he's lasted over a year and tripled in size. Finley tugs nervously at his Iron Maiden shirt as he passes a cop. He checks his speed and cautiously pulls the seatbelt over his chest and clicks it into place. He thinks, "Don't pull me over, please." He isn't ready to deal with the police. He hasn't thought this far ahead. The officer turns left and into a gas station. Finley sighs, relief, and looks back at where the radio should be. It's too quiet for him. His thoughts float carelessly through his head. He pictures himself as a police officer for a moment and laughs at the thought. If his dad was around, or if his mother stopped drinking, if his brother never beat him, and if he stayed in school. He wondered where his life would have been then. What kind of person he would be now. An outstanding citizen, he imagines, with a wife and kids. He creates the vision of his family in his head. A woman with large breasts and red hair. 2 kids, 1 boy and 1 girl, with toothless smiles on their dirty faces. They would be soccer players, like Finley was, and always outside. He shakes off the thought. Sucks not having a radio, he thinks. He sits up taller in the driver's seat and lets out a little scream. Ah! He relaxes and slumps back into his seat. He tries to whistle, and fails, only allowing air to escape his pursed lips. He blows a tune through his teeth and grunts in frustration. I wish I knew how to whistle. Both my parents could. Even Franklin can, he says in his head. He tries again, and a small tweet of a sound flies from in between his lips. He grins at his small accomplishment. I hate tuna fish, he thinks. Finley starts to space out behind the wheel. The lack of sound tricks his brain. He visualizes a concert he went to last year. He remembers all the pockets he picked and wallets he stole. He made 5 times the amount of the cost of the tickets he paid for, but wasn't able to enjoy the concert properly. The songs of the band echoes throughout his mind. He taps the steering wheel to the beat of the song stuck in his head. He hums the melody. He looked back at the center console and sighed loudly. There wasn't even a clock. What time is it? He wondered. I should have stolen a watch. Or a car with a radio. The car was quiet. Even the purr of the engine was hushed. Everything is still, except the thoughts in Finley's head. He thinks about the graduation he never attended, the smell of his last girlfriend right before she walked out the door, the taste of sea salt ice cream and how it was superior to any other flavor. He pictures the last family photo they had together when times were good. How Franklin had his arm around him in a rare, loving embrace. It is loud in Finley's head, and there is no sound to hide behind. He groans and tries to shake off all his thoughts, clear his head. It's no use. The thoughts always come back, stronger and louder than before. He is going mad from the silence. I can pull the steering wheel. It would be easy to wreck such a nice car. The guardrail teases Finley. He envisions the crash in his head and plays out the scene slowly. The metal twisted around the body of the convertible, the popped wheel and broken windshield. He shakes off the thought and continues driving, now upset by the concept he created in his mind. He can't distract himself from himself. There was nothing to drown out his perception of his own ideations. He can't clear his head. He's trapped within himself. Finley screams and pulls the car over. The wheels spin angrily against the dirt on the shoulder. He bangs the steering wheel with a fist and groans. He hears the sound of sirens and looks in the mirror. He didn't notice the police officer that pulled a U-turn at the last intersection. He didn't see the car behind him getting closer and closer. He watches as a police officer steps out of his squad car and aims a gun at his Corvette. Now what? This isn't part of his plan. He licks his lips and glares at his new challenge. He throws the car into drive and slams on the gas pedal. The car lurches forward and spins wildly back on the road. The cop calls it in and drives after Finley. The 2-lane road was barren. The twists and turns makes Finley feel he was back on a roller coaster without the strangers. The contents of his stomach sloshes around. Well, this is great. He wanders ahead, trying to come up with a plan. He didn't know these streets that well, and another police car pulls up alongside Finley. He kicks up the speed and lets out a yelp as the car responds. They race down the street. The sirens blare loudly. Finley watches as the police cars serve and drive around each other like synchronized swimmers after him. These guys are good, but not as good as me. I need to lose them. He thinks about car chase videos he's watched online and in movies. The bad guy always gets caught somehow, with some small mistake he plans to avoid. He turns down a dirt road quickly, but the cars behind don't falter and follow him. The dirt is slick on the wheels, and with the sharp turn, he flips the car. He curses himself as the car rolls into the ditch upside down. The sound of scrapping metal pierces his ears. It's quiet for a moment as the dust settles. He wasn't going to get caught. Especially now, they will find out exactly how many people he's robbed. He isn't planning on going to jail. Edison would miss him. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands in the air," the officer shouts, spit flying out of his mouth. They were behind open car doors, ready for Finley to react. Finley's heart races as his hands went for the unloaded gun. "You'll never take me alive, coppers," he shouts in his mind. He smiles. He was on the track and field team in high school. Surely he could outrun the police. He's done it before, with success. He pushes the car door open, and without thinking, Finley hops out the car and runs, pointing the gun behind him. His feet slip on the loose gravel, but he collects himself and moves his feet fast underneath him. He takes 3 more steps away from the police, gun heavy in his hands. Bang! The silence is deafening. The angst of Antilla. "Tell me the truth. Where are you from?" Yannick roared, leader of the Goobies, a notorious nomadic southern desert clan. In his teepee kneeled a young woman bound by the ankles and wrists. She wore a dirty, white satin tunic and breeches. Her brunette hair escaped from under her sand-dusted headscarf. Around her tired eyes, a darkened mixture of sand and sweat stuck to her skin. Other than that, the rest of her face remained untouched. Inside the teepee stood a few wooden chests and a bed of dried rushes wrapped in linen. A lantern sat next to the bed, and about 4 woven ruh covered the desert floor. A leather bag lay across the floor, next to the woman. Through the crack of the entrance, stars could be seen, twinkling in the inky darkness of the desert sky. stretching out towards the far horizon. A slight chill wisped its way inside and curled around the room. Besides the faint talk of those in the surrounding tents, only the crackle of the rushes burning in the lantern could be heard. "I've said too much," the woman murmured. Yannick slapped her across the face. Her head snapped sideways, the red sting blooming across her cheek. Slowly, she turned back to face Yannick, trembling with rage. She glared at him, her blazing eyes drilling unsettlingly into his soul. Yannick took a step back. The wrinkles on his forehead loosened as frustration turned to shock. "No way. This can't be," he whispered, feeling his stomach drop. He lowered to one knee to face her. He had to confirm what he was seeing. He let out a sharp sigh of disbelief. His eyes weren't fooling him. "How?" he asked her. She continued to shoot daggers at him, remaining quiet. "How?" he repeated. "How what?" she spat. "Amber." Your eyes turned amber. She broke eye contact with Yannick and stared blankly at the reed-woven floor. Her eyes flickered back to a deep shade of brown. Yannick shuddered as he felt a sudden chill leave his bones. "Tell me I'm wrong when I say that you're from Antilla," Yannick said, holding his breath. The woman shut her eyes and sighed. "Tell me!" he roared impatiently. She looked up at him again, amber flickering faintly through her pupils. A coldness instantly rushed over him again. "You're not wrong. I am from Antilla." Yannick exhaled sharply, falling backwards to sit on the floor. He crossed his legs and ran one hand through his hair. "H, how is it possible? How did you survive?" he questioned in a softer tone. "Untie me, then I'll tell you," she hissed, her menacing amber gaze burning into Yannick. "You have some nerve. Then let my secrets remain untold," she jeered, narrowing her eyes. Her lip curled slightly. Yannick scoffed before getting up. He walked over to her leather bag and threw it angrily behind him, out of the woman's reach. He reached down, lifted the end of his robe, and took a sharp dagger from a tight piece of cloth wrapped around his ankle. He kneeled behind the woman and started to cut away at her restraints. She rolled her shoulders and stretched her neck the moment she was free. She stood up briefly, stretching her legs, and before sitting back down with her legs crossed. Yannick kept his eyes locked on her, dagger in hand, before he sat down again. "Thank you," she said, with a slight nod. "I will tell you how I managed to make it out alive from Antilla. But it will not help you, nor will it bring any peace to this situation. It will only quench your curiosity." "A favor for a favor," Yannick said, twisting his knife from the blade's tip. "Very well." The woman dug deep into her mind to try to resurface the day she made it out of Antilla. The memories came flooding back in an instant. "Tonight, a distant star will die. It will explode into blues and pinks and purples," Kira said, bursting with excitement. "And how do you know this?" I said, crossing my arms. Kira had a vivid imagination. We never knew if what she was saying was fact or something she had created in her head. Next to the North Star last night, I noticed one of the stars getting dimmer and dimmer until it disappeared. It was always there. I had it plotted on my star map. I waited for a long time, but it never came back. This lines up with the legend of Nara, Thomas interrupted. The legend that described Nara Envith witnessing the night sky illuminating in an unfathomable display. The disappearance of a star followed by a cascade of colors, painting the night sky. Thomas leaned against one of the cobblestone walls of a side street in the market square of Antilla. The three teens were hidden in a corner of the square, watching the passers-by. The city was bustling with Antillian traders and foreign folk. Horses with small wooden carts clicked along the uneven cobblestone roads surrounding the square. The stalls were propped up in the center, interested customers weaving their way in and out of them. Bursts of vibrant colors decorated the city, from vivid Antillian woven silk to collections of earthy sienna spices from the south. A preacher suddenly emerged from the crowds and took a stand at the city's gathering point next to where we were chatting. He instantly drew the attention of the market-goers. His brown hair was scraggly, and his cheeks wore a crimson flush. His sweaty, cream tunic adhered to his skin and was half stuffed into the top of his black breeches. His chest heaved dramatically as he gasped for air. "We need to make peace with the brethren of Tuiga," he shouted, trying to regain his breath. "They will come, and they will not stop unless we equalize the trade in the north. The rulers of Antilla are setting us up to die. Open your eyes, people. The brethren are coming." The city guards swiftly appeared and hauled the man off the gathering point. A few of his passionate followers preached behind him, throwing their fists in the air in frustration as he was dragged away into the teeming crowds. Quickly, a bard stood up, seizing the unoccupied podium, curating songs of mockery about the preacher. He quickly gained a laughing audience. "Well, do you want to join me on my search tonight?" Kira toothily smiled, oblivious to the scenes around her. Thomas and I exchanged looks. We knew that meant camping on the roof of her steading till early hours of the morning in the freezing cold. "It's a bit chilly, don't you think, Priscilla?" Thomas asked, raising his eyebrows. I agree. Besides, my parents would not appreciate it if I were to fall ill." I get it, Kira grumbled. "But just know that you are missing the chance to watch a legend be reborn. The legend of Kira." Thomas and I rolled our eyes. We spent some time browsing the market stalls for any interesting items we could buy with our measly 5 silver coins. To our avail, we found nothing. Once the vendors began disassembling their stalls, we headed home for dinner. The foreign merchants made their way to their respective inns, weary from the long day. The concealed stars slowly emerged into the darkened sky, and a cold air settled over the city. Merchants drank into the early hours, while children drifted to sleep. Wrapped in woolen blankets, I woke up to the frantic banging of Kira's mother on our front door in the dark of night. "Hurry! Hurry! Wake up!" she screamed. My dad rushed to the door. My mother's footsteps could be heard running to the kitchen. In the background, I could hear the petrified voice of Kira's mother explaining to my father, "The brethren are coming." Kira saw them crescenting the hills from the south. "We don't have much time. We need to leave before they get here. There are thousands of them." Without a moment's hesitation, my dad came storming into my room. "Dayu, what's happening?" I asked. He grabbed my arm and dragged me off my bed without a word. My mother was waiting at the door with a lantern. In the span of a few minutes, buildings had been set alight, and screams could be heard echoing through the city from the outer walls. We ran through the streets, trying to avoid soldiers and other screaming townsfolk, hoping to make it to the north of the city before the soldiers got there. But it was no use. We were surrounded. "Priscilla, you need to listen to me," my dad said sternly. He kneeled down to face me and placed his hands firmly on my shoulders. "Those carts by the city walls will soon be leaving. You need to climb under one and grab on. Do not let go. Do you hear me? Do not let go. You need to get out of here. We love you so much. We will come find you. Go. Be safe, my dear." Tears spilled down his cheeks, illuminating in the fire's blaze. "Dad, go!" I did what I was told. I ran to a horse and carriage next to one of the burning buildings by the city's outer wall. Before I went under, I looked back, hoping to see my parents to say my final goodbyes. But they had vanished. I climbed under the large carriage and held on to the wooden foundations. I wrapped the top of my feet behind another plank of wood. It only took a minute or so before a couple came running in a panic and climbed into the carriage. "Hurry!" the woman screamed as her partner leaped inside, closing the door behind him. A coachman jumped onto the front of the cart and instantly got the horse in a gallop. The cart moved quickly out of the city, cobblestone streets changing to rough dirt roads. We turned occasionally until we were headed for the south. As we moved further away, the stillness of the cold, airy night echoed the distant, muffled screams escaping from Antilla. Tears slipped down my cheeks, but a cry could not form. I didn't know if I would ever see my family or friends again. My whole world had changed in a heartbeat. My thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the jolt of the cart coming to a stop. I heard the neigh of a distant horse and footsteps approaching the carriage. There was a sudden gurgling as the swish of an arrow flew through the air. There was a splintering of wood, and a sudden force pushed the carriage backwards. The coachman's horse neighed, its nostrils flaring as it pulled against its reins, hooves scraping against the ground. The footsteps neared the cart until I could see the feet of what I could only guess was a soldier. The soldier walked to the carriage door and swung it open. Those inside screamed in fear before the man silenced their petrified cries with a pierce of a sword. The blood in their throats gurgled and spluttered for a few seconds, their bodies jerking and flailing in the carriage before they fell still. My lungs screamed for air. My heart was racing in my chest. The soldier dragged the bodies out of the cart and threw them on the ground with a thump. Their heads bounced off the soil. Two sets of lifeless eyes stared blankly at me from the dirt floor. The woman's gown and the man's tunic were drenched in blood, and they had huge gaping wounds for necks. I felt my palms get sweaty and my grip loosening. "Don't let go, Priscilla. Don't let go," I told myself. I felt a sudden heat and heard a crackle of wood. The carriage had been set alight. I turned my head frantically, trying to find the feet of the murderer. Instead, 4 hooves galloped alongside the carriage and headed in the direction of Antilla. I wanted to wait until I couldn't hear the thunder of hooves anymore before letting go. Instead, the fumes of burning wood engulfed my lungs, and the hiss of flames dancing in the wind deafened the soldier's departure. The fire closed under the carriage. The sweat on my hands was as slippery as oil. My body burned, sweat grabbing onto my hair and the fabric of my clothes. The roaring flames licked off my exposed skin as they surrounded me. It was then I let go. I scurried out from under the carriage, staying low. I looked cautiously around, but saw nothing. I carefully moved away from the cart, pulling myself along the ground with my forearms and pushing myself with my feet. My heart pounded in my chest. I had to keep going. I had to be brave. A forest lay ahead. Through the mud and reeds, I finally made it to where the grass met the tree line. I got up on one knee, attempting to stay low, wiping the sweat from my forehead on my ashy linen shirt. I tried to regain my breath. I looked back at Antilla, the burning carriage collapsing in the corner of my eye. The city was being swallowed by the fire. I could make out hundreds upon thousands of more soldiers marching their way to the stone walls of my city. Their huge war band stretched into the distance, further than the eye could see. A harrowing pain of grief shot through me, each quivering breath a battle against the burning agony in my chest. Before I could process anything, the sound of soldiers on horses re-emerged from my left. Without thinking, I ran. I ran into the forest, never looking back. I had lost everything that day. There has ever been a more notorious massacre than the massacre of Antilla. There were no survivors, except for me. Yanuk shook his head in disbelief. "Are you ready?" he asked. "For what?" Yanuk stood up and outstretched his hand to regain the north. Priscilla blinked at him in bewilderment. They did not only steal Antilla. The Brethren banished us nomads from our territories, leaving us stateless in the south. They are trying to rule over all the sacred lands. We shall not let that happen. We are going to fight. We will take back what is rightfully ours. Are you in? Priscilla hesitated for a moment. The bottled anger boiled her blood. A fiery passion burst in the pit of her stomach, longing to gain revenge for her friends, her family, her home. She looked up at Yanuk, eyes burning with an igniting amber. Priscilla nodded and took Yanuk's hand. She was ready to fight. To the person who buys my house. Months ago, I uprooted my entire life and moved across the country with very little plan. My wife left me out of the blue. With no tether, I cashed out my 401k and threw caution to the wind. I drove until I saw snow before deciding to try out the small town life. After nailing down a full-time job and growing tired of life in the town's only hotel, I reached out to a realtor and asked her to show me the house that's been on the market the longest. A fixer-upper was just what I needed. The realtor didn't have much information on the home outside of the basics, but I was sold as soon as I saw it. 3 stories, isolated deep in the woods. What more could a man looking to start over with a project ask for? After closing, I was given a fill folder containing all the important information. With all the standard documents was a handwritten letter from the previous homeowner. The contents of the letter have me questioning if I made the right choice, but I've never been one to turn down a challenge. I have typed the contents of the letter below. To the person who buys my house, congratulations on the purchase of your new home. Or perhaps, should I say, you're welcome for your new home. I can only imagine what type of person you may be. A first-time home buyer, a newlywed couple just starting out, a growing family looking for more space, a retiree longing to be away from the hustle and bustle of the city, or even just an investor looking for rental properties. The possibilities are endless, but no less exciting. Just as exciting as when my late husband and I first purchased the property so many years ago. The tree covering so far off the main road made such a serene setting. We just couldn't picture ourselves living anywhere else. However, all things must come to an end. Such is life. I'm not as young as I once was. My children worried for me out here all alone. Or so they say. My oldest daughter decided the property was too much for me to care for on my own anymore, and encouraged me to move to the old folks' home in the next town. As loath as I was to leave the home we spent such wonderful years in, I could no longer argue with her. The upkeep was getting to be a little much for these old bones. I agreed on one condition: that the home not be put up for sale until my death. So, if you are receiving this letter, I have shuffled off this mortal coil. That also means that the house has most likely sat vacant for some time. In that case, there are a few matters of housekeeping you should be aware of. As you may have noticed when you viewed the property, the house is quite the old gal. Her 3 stories stand tall and formidable in the dense forest surrounding it. Though the trees tower over her, she will not be cowed. The roof has held up better than we ever expected with so many trees around. It was replaced in 2018, another urging of my oldest daughter. Though it had only a few cosmetic issues at the time, the trees closest to the home are sturdy and hardly ever dare to drop their branches directly on the roof. By the time you move in, it may be time for a fresh coat of paint, though I found the house does prefer to be a light blue with white trim. She likes to stand out amongst the darkness of the forest. I'll never forget the way the old gal gleamed at Christmas time, with string lights shining bright enough to light up the snow all around. Oh, I do hope you have the most wondrous Christmases there. Anyway, I've gotten off track. Yes, the house will require a new coat of paint, and I'm sure you will decorate the inside as you see fit. Before you start to move too much around, be aware that some of the items in the house have been strategically placed. For you to fully understand what a treasure you have just purchased, I feel it is pertinent for me to tell you a little story. My Reginald and I purchased the home fully furnished before any of our children were brought into this world. The first year we lived there was pure bliss. Young and in love, we dedicated almost all of our time to each other. My husband fondly referred to this time as our honeymoon phase. One of our favorite activities was exploring the vast property surrounding us. When the weather did not permit roaming, we explored the home itself, though from the outside it appears as any manor in the woods would. Inside is much to be discovered. During that first year, we enjoyed the convenience of it being fully furnished and move-in ready. But over time, I yearned to decorate, to make the space my own. Reginald, ever the obedient husband, humored me. We started by taking down every painting that hung on the walls, deciding which to keep, which to sell away, and which to simply move to a different area. That is when the first odd discovery was made. Behind a great many of the paintings, there were holes, right in the plaster walls. Some appeared to be methodically cut in perfect squares. Others, as though a fist was punched straight through it. We, of course, decided that those would eventually be covered back up. I piled the painting up in the drawing room and set about cleaning the walls. By the end of the day, I had yet to decide on what exactly to do with them. So I let them lie and went to bed. In the morning, however, they were all hung perfectly back in their spots, as if all my work had never happened. For days, I assumed Reginald had done it, and he assumed I had. We ultimately didn't speak of it until it was too late. When my Reginald started back to work as supervisor of the factory in town, I resumed my endeavor to make the home feel like it was mine. I hated the big rugs scattered all around the place. I've always preferred a nice hardwood floor. No need for carpets that hold all the dirt and hair that's dragged in. The furniture was easy enough to move out of my way, and the rugs all rolled up nicely. I was mighty proud of my hard work until I got a good look at the wood. Large, dark, discolored splotches marred what should have been beautiful hardwood hiding under those ghastly rugs, which I'm sure you've seen. Unfortunately, much like the paintings, the rugs remained. I'd go into more detail, but some of the full truths have been lost to time. But I will tell you, be careful what you look behind or under. Though the house allowed me to dust and paint and add decor as my heart desired, it did not allow me to leave any of its secret spots uncovered. Behind dressers, cabinets, doors, paintings, mirrors, and under couches, chairs, and beds, the house hides. After the first year, I gave up trying to rearrange and became content with adding a few of my own touches here and there. I think that once the house realized I'd stopped trying to change it so much, it settled down. For a while at least, we entered a time of peace again. But the monotony of loneliness began to get to me. Thankfully, we soon welcomed our oldest daughter. As soon as she arrived, the house awoke with laughter and joy. All hours of the night, she would giggle, and the house seemed to echo with it, those echoes long lingering even after she fell asleep. As we welcomed more children, it seemed that no matter how much we tied, the house remained scattered with toys. It was as if I'd turn my back and they'd all jump right off the shelf and resume their places on the floor. The never-ending chore of putting away made me weary to my bones. In a stroke of wisdom, my Reginald decided one summer to send the children to my mother's for a week. She lived on the coast, never one for the colder air where we chose to live. We didn't see her often, and the children did love her so. Off they went without a complaint, leaving my love and I alone for the first time in over a decade. We didn't know what to do with ourselves. That first night, It was as if we were newlyweds again. But I won't traumatize you with any of that. We felt so young again, only waking when the sun finally shone through our bedroom window, with no rush to feed the masses. When we finally emerged from our bed a little after noon, we walked into an unexpected scene. Every toy, book, pen, shoe, and piece of sports equipment that belonged to the children had been strewn about the first floor in the most uncivilized manner. There was no question that the house had been perfectly clean the night before. Our first thought was that we'd been burgled, that someone had broken in, thinking we'd all left for the coast. The only problem is, we told no one the children were leaving, and we had no neighbors to have noticed their departure. Regardless, we checked for signs of forced entry on all the doors and windows. Finding nothing, we were forced to believe it was whatever force we had once felt in our home, agitated with us once more. As you've probably ascertained, the house is very particular. We had come to accept not being able to move the furniture or pictures, but were only just realizing that the house did not like many of the new things we'd brought in either. How many times had I picked certain toys up off the floor, only to find them there again in the morning? How many times had I unfairly blamed the children for messes they claimed they knew nothing about? That morning, we saw the truth of the matter, and I knew something had to change. The children didn't deserve my anger or anxiety. They were not to blame. When they returned, I was sure to tell them as much. But before then, we had to find a way to coexist again with the forces in the house. What should have been a week of relaxation and reconnecting became a week of trial and error. On the first day, we tidied the house, putting everything back where we thought everything should go. Each room made perfect. Then we waited for the first item to fall out of place. As if the house was testing us, it took hours for anything to happen that first day. Then it started, slowly at first, giving us time to notice the items that were out of place, time to correct. It seemed to go in order of the things that bothered it the most, or maybe just the longest. The first toy to go was a set of bells we'd gotten when our oldest was small. The set was a popular toy amongst all our babies. With our youngest being nearly 8 at the time, these bells hadn't truly rung joyously through the house in years, yet they always made their way off the shelf onto the rug. Our family's peace was more important than any sentimentality, or at least that's what my husband and I agreed. And into the bin they went. Quickly, we noticed patterns. Toys that made too much noise. Shoes that left scuffs on the floor. Sports equipment that may or may not have been involved in a few broken windows and busted light bulbs. Books that sat too heavy on the overburdened bookshelves. Room by room we went, removing any and all items the house found to be offensive. It was by no means an easy undertaking. So many items had many more years of use left in them. But knowing what I knew, I could no longer sacrifice my sanity for a few boxes full of possessions. When the last box of offending items left the property, it was as if the house itself took a deep, calming breath. I hadn't quite realized just how stressed I'd been feeling until I didn't feel it anymore. Weight I'd grown accustomed to bearing eased off my shoulders. The air was lighter, the lights were brighter, and the house even seemed to smell better. Not that there was a noticeable bad smell before. Everything just felt better. That night, Reginald and I slept deeply for the first time in years, waking refreshed and ready for anything. I was ready for my children to come home. This week had been the longest we'd been apart since the youngest was born. I'd spent 2 weeks in the hospital that time, but that's neither here nor there. We had 2 more days before my mother would return them to us, sun-kissed and spoiled rotten in the best way. In those 2 days, I made time to sit quietly and listen to the house the way I used to when it was just Reginald and myself. Familiar creaks and groans greeted my ears. My senses were filled with the house. The smell of wood, water, earth, detergents, fabric, food, all seemed to swirl around me. For a long while, it was all just the normal feelings of home, of any home. Every house I'd ever lived in had the same smells and sounds. I assume every house in the whole world has the same base set of smells, sounds, and lights. I knew there was something past that, though, here. So I waited. A few months back, I'd read a book on meditation, hoping to help lift some of the stress I'd been buried under. While I waited, I took a few quests from my readings. I methodically relaxed each muscle, starting at my toes and working my way to my head. I felt each breath as it traveled in and out of my lungs. I tried to tune my ears inward to listen to the beating of my heart, attempting to hear the blood rushing through my veins. That's when I finally heard the breathing. It wasn't my own. It was offbeat of mine. Reginald wasn't home. We had no pets, but the slow, deep, steady breaths were just a whisper in my ear. I focused with all my might on the sound, hoping to pinpoint the direction it was coming from. Realization dawned on me. I was all around me, as if I was inside a lung. Then, a heartbeat, slower than my own, reverberated around me. Slowly, I opened my eyes. What I saw changed everything. Ever so lightly, the walls billowed in and out. Ever so slightly, the chandelier above my head rhythmically bobbed as if contracting, thrumming. Everything in the central family room moved in a steady beat. How many days had we spent in this room? The majority of our lives circulated in this room, where we were most often all together as a family, the way a family room should be used. We often joked that this room was the heart of the house, because there was always so much love here. We were not wrong. This room truly holds the heart of the home. You may think I'm crazy, but I am telling you, here and now, the house is alive. It is not haunted. There are no goblins or ghouls. The house itself is a living, breathing being, a being that I have cared for, just as it has cared for me, for more years than I care to count. You see, my daughter never believed. She did not understand. When I finally agreed that I was too old to care for the house on my own, it was because the house told me so. Not her. I was growing too old to care for it, and in turn, it could no longer care for me. It needs someone younger, someone to breathe new life into it again. And if you care for it, it will care for you. When tended to properly, it will multiply your life and give you more than you can ever imagine. I do hope Carmen found the right person to take on the challenge. I pray the house does not miss us too terribly much. If you follow the rules, then it should grow to love you, too, I'm sure. With love, Cynthia. Rule 1. Don't move the furniture. Rule 2. Don't leave any holes uncovered. Rule 3. Don't make changes. Only fix things that break. Rule 4. Don't put anything on the mantel in the bedroom. Rule 5. Never throw balls inside. Rule 6. Never scream at your partner inside. On the grounds is fine. Rule 7. Always walk gently. Rule 8. Always lock the doors. Rule 9. Always listen to the house. Take care of it, and it will take care of you. I have lived in the house for a week now. What I thought to be the ramblings of a crazy old woman who wanted nothing more than to stay with her home have quickly become undeniable truths. On my second night, the house welcomed me in a way only it could have. I'm not sure if this makes me just as crazy as her, but I vowed to care for this home as long as it cares for me. We're off to a great start. Haunting. Jack couldn't speak. He could only scream as he woke up to the sound of his mother's voice, whispering to him from the corner of his dark bedroom. Of course, it wasn't actually his mother. He knew that. How could it be, when she had died in a car accident just a little over a week earlier? Jack. Come over here, Jack. You can see me, can't you? Come over here, child. His chest was heavy, his bladder loose with fear. Looking over into the corner, as he flailed amidst his perspiration-damp sheets, he realized that he could indeed see something. The same something in fact, that he had seen on that terrible night of his mum's demise, just minutes after his aunt, who had been babysitting him at the time, had received the phone call that would cause both of their worlds to come crashing down. She had broken the news to him, and he had seen it standing over by the window of his aunt's tiny living room. It had been at the funeral too, and now here it was again, invading the privacy of his bedroom this time, lurking in the corner, watching him, taunting him by speaking with his dead mother's voice. "Jack! Come here, Jack!" Now, tears of terror spilled down his cheeks as he scrambled to sit up. His gaze was fixed upon the corner, on the hulking, dark outline of a man who stood there, wide and tall, so tall that its head almost brushed the ceiling. It had no face, no features. It was only visible because somehow it was even blacker than the darkness itself which suffused the room, blacker than the very night. How could that be? His screams tapered off as his throat constricted. From elsewhere in the house, he could hear the sound of frantic movements. His aunt had clearly been roused by his yells. Her footsteps raced across the landing, old floorboards groaning loudly. "I'll return, Jack. You can't avoid me forever." His mother's voice hissed quietly. The thing then scuttled, spider-like, across to the wall, and then through it, as though no barrier existed at all, as though the laws of physical matter simply did not matter to it one bit. The thing disappeared from his sight just as the bedroom door was flung open and the light snapped on to dazzle him with its bright glare. "Jack, Jack, are you all right?" His Aunt Alice stood there, looking pale and startled. Her resemblance to his mum, as always these days, struck him like a dagger through the heart. They had the same raven hair, just as he did himself, the same ice-blue eyes, same sharp cheekbones, same thin lips, his mother's now stilled forever, whilst his aunt's were pinched in a worried frown as she approached the bed where he lay. "Sweetheart, what is it? Did you have a bad dream?" He shook his head. It was bad, all right, but it was no dream. He raised a trembling hand to point over at the corner where the thing had been standing, mocking him by its mimicking of his dead mother's voice as it tried to lure him in. Alice turned to look, but quickly brought her attention back to him. "There's nothing there, Jack. You just had a nightmare, that's all." Her gaze shifted, moving down over his sheets, where a damp stain alerted him also to the fact that he must have wet himself. He cringed, the tears coursing faster down his cold cheeks. What kind of a 12-year-old wet the bed? "It's all right," his aunt soothed. "I'll get those in the wash and you can come and sleep with me in my bed for the rest of the night. It'll be dawn in a couple of hours anyway." And so saying, she ushered him out of his bed and took his hand to lead him over to her room. As always, it smelled strongly of lavender. After tucking him in, she retreated back to strip the damp sheets from his bed. Meanwhile, he lay there, alone once more in the darkness, eyes wide open, and frantically scanning the dark shapes all around him, lest the shadow should return again that night to torment him. All the while, the sound of his aunt's stifled sobs haunted his ears.
Chanta,
"Abi, if you can hear me, please respond. I don't know what to do. He hasn't spoken a word since you died, and he seems so disturbed. He's been having night terrors," and Jack crept down the stairs, being careful to avoid the creaking steps. His skin was crawling, body covered in goosebumps, not from the cold, but from a renewed sense of fear. Peering over the banister, he saw his aunt in the living room. She was sitting with her back to him, cross-legged on the floor beside the coffee table. On the table itself, right in front of her, was a board, a wooden board with letters and numbers on its surface, the exact same kind of board as he remembered seeing his mother messing around with so many times before, late in the evenings after she'd had a bottle of wine. "Abi, are you here with us? Please, Gyan." He wanted to run down the remainder of the steps, grab that board, and smash it to pieces, or burn it to ashes. For there was something about it that just seemed so very, very wrong. He was stopped in his tracks, however, by a sudden, sharp gasp from his aunt. She had her fingers resting on top of a small, circular piece of glass, which rested atop the board. And as he watched, the piece of glass slid free of Alice's grip and went spinning away, clearly moving of its own volition. It raced in jagged lines all across the board. Jack felt dizzy at what he was seeing. His legs gave way beneath him as he sank down onto one of the steps, his buttocks slamming painfully hard against the bare wood. Candlelight leapt in the room before him, the multiple flames flickering wildly. A muffled groan rumbled deep in his chest. Alice did not turn around. She was far too intent upon whatever message was being spelled out to hear him. He watched as she snatched up a nearby notebook and pen, scribbling frantically as she noted down what she was seeing reveal itself before her, never taking her eyes off the board. Eventually, the glass fell still. Something stirred in the air. The candle stuttered. His aunt gave a shiver, and Jack watched as the shadow man emerged through the closed door into the kitchen, moving to stand right beside Alice, reaching out with one of its thick arms as though to touch her. Another gust of wind blew through the room, carrying on it the stench of something rotting. Unable to take it anymore, Jack scrambled to his feet and ran back up the stairs. He cowered in his aunt's bed, covers pulled up over his head. As in the room below, he heard her begin to scream. Epitaphs to Elsa. September 8th, 1986. Elsa, it's just me now. Just me and the waves. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe I just want to believe you can still hear me. The boat is quiet without you. I keep thinking I'll hear your footsteps in the cabin. That soft little shuffle you made when you didn't want to wake me. But I know better. You're not here. And I did that. I miss you. God, I miss you. You never should have stayed with me, Elsa. You should have let me rot the moment you saw what I was becoming. But you never ran. Not when the hunger started. Not when my skin came apart. Not even when you saw what I would do. You should have run. You saw it. That thing inside me. It doesn't care what I want. It doesn't care how much I fight. I don't want to remember them, but I do. That old fisherman just happened to be in the wrong place. He looked me in the eye and knew something was wrong. I saw the way his face tightened before he turned to run. It didn't matter. It happened too fast, and he split apart like a red, stained driftwood after they reached him. I didn't want to hurt any of them, but you know what I am, and you know the worst of it. The only thing in this world that can kill me. Water. The sea, the rain, even a goddamn puddle. You said it was poetic, that all we needed to do was wash the sins away, and that would be it. I wish I could tell you I'm sorry and have that be enough, but I know that it isn't. My mind is slipping. I thought I heard you earlier, but when I turned, there was nothing but the water. I can feel it starting to itch beneath my skin again. I must attend to its needs until morning. Leon, September 2nd, 1986. Leon, I woke up from a terrible dream and could not tell where I was, nor even when I was. For the longest time, I thought I was still in our cabin, with the warped floorboards and the leaky window that rattled in the wind. I thought I heard the waves outside, but they were too far away. I sat up and reached for something, but there was nothing. No warmth, no weight, just a hollow feeling. And then I remembered you. I used to think I could live in your shadow forever, that it was enough to stand between you and the world, to hide what you had become from those who would have tried to take you from me. But you never really belonged to me. You belonged to it. I fed you. I kept you safe and suffered with you. And still, in the end, you left me here. I think I was angry. I still might be. You say you miss me, that you never wanted this, that you never wanted them to die. I believe you. You don't have to look for me. I'm already here. Elsa, September 9th, 1986. Afternoon. Elsa, this isn't real. You're not real. I don't know what kind of madness has settled into my head, but I know what I saw. There is no one on this boat. I searched every inch, Elsa. Every cabin, every hatch. There aren't even footprints, not a single sign that anyone but me has been here. And yet, your letter was waiting for me in the same place I left mine, in your handwriting. Exactly your handwriting. Where are you? What do you mean you're already here? No, I won't do this. I won't chase ghosts. I won't let my brain rot on the deck of this damned boat, waiting for another letter to appear out of nowhere. Not when I can still feel the scars where it broke through my skin last night. Raw, burning, until I fed it with something I brought on board. I'll leave this here for you, if only to prove to myself that I'm not completely unraveling. Maybe a drink will help. Leon, September 2nd, 1986. Leon, I can't see the sunset the way I used to, but I know you can. You always liked that time of day best. As the light faded over the horizon, the world softening, I remember watching you, even after you changed. I wanted to believe that if I just held on to you long enough, you would come back to me. I thought love could keep you human. Do you remember what you are, who you have become? You remember the killing, but not the hunger. Do you recall what happened before I died? You used to say that the sea was patient, that it takes its time, wearing things down piece by piece until all that's left is what it chooses to keep. You think you're drifting, waiting to decide how this ends. But you're wrong. You will never truly die here. Not unless you sink. Elsa, September 9th, 1986. Sunset. Elsa, you dated your letter September 2nd. I don't know what kind of joke this is. If this is my mind breaking, or if this is actually you, or if there's no difference anymore. But I know that date. That's the day after you died, and I killed you. I need to say it. I need to write it. I need to stop hiding from it like a coward, because I remember now. I remember the way you looked at me when you realized what I had become. I remember you tried to save me, tried to save them. I remember the knife in your hand and the tears in your eyes when you begged me to just let it end. I remember that you weren't fast enough. I remember the way you screamed when I touched you, the way your body turned to ruin beneath my hands, the way you stopped fighting when you knew there was nothing left to fight for. I remember the moment you stopped being afraid of me. I remember everything, Elsa, and you were right. I am not human anymore. You said the sea is patient, but so is the thing inside me. It waits. It watches. It lets me write these letters, like I still have control, like I still have a choice, like I could ever truly leave this boat. But I know better now. I know what I have to do. This time, I'll finish what you started. Leon, September 3rd, 1986. Leon, you stayed up waiting for me, didn't you? You always used to do that when we were kids. You'd sit up by the window, refusing to sleep until I came back inside. I used to think it was sweet. Now I think maybe you always knew, even before you became this, that you were meant to be alone. I see now that I should have left you alone too, but I stayed and cleaned up after you, wiped their blood from your body, covered for you. Every time that thing leaked out from beneath your skin, I thought I was protecting you, but I wasn't. I was keeping the monster alive, and that's why you killed me. You can stop pretending now. You remember everything. I tried to end it before it could spread. I would have done it if you'd let me. You should have let me. Instead, you turned on me. You let it break me apart, like all the others. You wept and rocked what was left of me, like I was still yours, like I hadn't just died in your arms. And in some twisted way, maybe I am still yours, but that doesn't matter now. You have one thing left to do. Come visit me where I am now. That is the right thing to do. Love, your sister, Elsa, September 10th, 1986. Elsa, yes, you know me best. I stayed up all night waiting for you. I watched the page, scotch in hand, eyes burning. I wouldn't sleep, not until I caught you in the act and saw how you did it. But I must have drifted off, because when I opened my eyes, your letter was there, and your last words shattered me. You were my sister, my only sister. You were always there, watching over me, covering for me. You loved me when no one else could, and God damn it, Elsa, I loved you too. We were alone, together, for so long. Maybe that's why it happened. Maybe that's how we fell into something we shouldn't have. Maybe that's why you still stayed after I changed. Why you still brought them to me. I never asked you to do it, but I never stopped you either. And now I see why. Because I was happy. I was happy when you fed me. I was happy when you lied for me, covered for me, hid me. I was happy when you were the only one in the world who saw me for what I was, and still stayed. And I thought that was enough. But you knew better. You knew that as long as I was out here, I wasn't just Leon. I was it. I was the thing that wears me, the thing that spreads itself through my hands, my mouth, my breath. You knew what had to be done, and I stopped you. And now I have to finish it. Elsa, after reading your last letter, I tried something. I let the water touch me. Just a few drops at first. Just enough to test what you told me. And I watched my own skin blacken. I watched it peel away, curl like burnt paper, dust scattering into nothing. And for the first time since that night, I felt something leave me. something I can never let return. I know what I have to do now. I should have done it a long time ago. I'll see you soon, Elsa. Leon, September 15th, 1986. Radio transmission, U.S. Coast Guard Channel, so 8:42 a.m. EST. Yeah, this is Patrol 6 out of Newport, responding to a distress call. We've located the vessel approximately 17 nautical miles offshore, drifting. No signs of life on board. Copy. Unintelligible reply. Copy. Yeah. We're boarding now. The name on the hull matches the missing vessel reported out of Washington last week. Belonged to one Leon Mathers. Yeah. The suspect in the Olympia killings. Still no sign of a body. Over. Hang on. Christ. Do you smell that? Muffled voices. Jesus. It's in the fog. Thick as hell. The air. God, it's like it's sticking to my skin. Unintelligible reply. Boats in rough shape. Some flooding in the lower cabin, but no visible damage. No sign of struggle. Looks like it's just been out here drifting. There's a letter on the table. Several, actually. We've got personal effects. ID matching Mathers. A sudden, sharp breath. Shit. No body. No trace of him. But we found part of someone. It's a leg. Left, severed mid-thigh. Not clean. No ID yet. Yeah. We'll check the water next. Shuffling, movement. The soft slosh of waves lapping against the hull. Oh, hell. Sir, you need to hear this part. Listen, there's something in the water. Around the boat. Not oil, not debris. It's dark. Black as ink. Looks like it's mixed with the waves, but it's thicker. Like it's trying to hold its shape. God, it's moving. No, I'm serious. It's bubbling. It's a pause, a quick breath. Alive. Chunks in it. Carbon, maybe. But some of them, another sharp breath, some of them are floating against the current. A quiet, shaken voice in the background. It's watching. Sir? Orders? Unintelligible reply. Collecting samples now. We'll tow the vessel back to port. End transmission. Cliffhanger. By Lee Kendrick. I had never been to a tropical country before. But Indonesia was my friend's, and I chose a holiday destination after we had scanned the internet for tropical countries. We all agreed to go to the Indonesian island of Sumba, an island as large as Jamaica. Apparently, Indonesia boasts the most islands of any country. Unbelievably, over 17,000. My friends Michael, Bob, and I, Dave, had booked a holiday here for 2 weeks. We planned to do some snorkeling, exploring the coral reefs, and go on some boat trips to some of the Indonesian islands. For now, we were just chilling out on a sun lounger, drinking cold beers on the white sands of the Mbawana beach. The Sumba Island landscape is so rich in exotic plants and animal life. It also boasts unusual rock formations, including the Halfling Giant Stone. This is a coastal rock with a large gaping hole through it. In fact, me and the boys are just 30 feet away from it, to our left. Another unusual thing about Indonesia is the Indian Ocean. It changes color, varying from turquoise to ultramarine blue to a remarkable golden orange. Another thing this part of the world is known for is its earthquakes and tsunamis. Just a few minutes ago, we felt a heavy earthquake, but this was normal for Indonesia. We were glad we weren't in a city full of buildings. The tremor only lasted for about 20 seconds, and then it just fizzled out. Nothing to worry about. Feeling hot, I decided to go for a dip in the ocean. As I slowly walked in the soft, powdery white sand towards the ocean, I sensed a foreboding. And for some reason, I noticed it was taking me longer than usual at this time of day to arrive by the ocean. I also observed pools of seawater with seaweed, crabs, and other sea creatures, which weren't there before. And I'm sure by now I would have been hearing the waves come crashing onto the beach. But the ocean seems much further away. Then it dawned on me as I stared out into the distance. There it was, a few miles away, a massive wall of water. Difficult to measure, but I would say it must be at least 50 feet high, and it was heading towards the beach. It was a tsunami. I had heard in documentaries about how the ocean suddenly withdraws from a beach, heralding a tsunami. Is this my time to die? I thought. I turned and ran as fast as I could, back towards my friends, wearing my stupid flip-flops. As I ran, I observed dozens of people lying on their beach towels, oblivious to what was about to happen. I attempted to shout to warn them, but no words would come from my mouth. I was unable to speak because I was in the grip of fear. I managed to attract a couple's attention, but they just waved back at me and continued sunbathing. I picked up a heavy shell and threw it at them, and then pointed frantically towards the wall of death. I ran and ran, painfully slowly, getting closer towards my friends. Then my friends Michael and Bob saw me. I waved with both hands, frantically in desperation, to try and warn them as I pointed back to the ocean. They just seemed to ignore me. Finally, I reached Michael and Bob to pull them away. My larynx was constricted, paralyzed. I couldn't utter one word as I pointed back towards the ocean. A bloody, gigantic blue-green wave was only a couple of 100 yards away. By now, there were people screaming everywhere on the beach. We all started running. But where? Where do we go? Do you climb a tree? The waves are too high. Do we try to outrun it? No. It's too close behind us, and it must be moving at over 100 km per now. Do we go left or right? Maybe the wave isn't as long as the beach. Very unlikely we could escape it. It probably stretches as far as the length of the beach. We kept on running in front for our lives. As the adrenaline coursed through our veins, I spotted the cliff some 50 yards away. The tsunami was now so close behind us, you could hear its thunderous roar, like a wild beast after its prey. As we managed to reach the cliff, we climbed as rapidly as we could, managing some 30 feet, when the wave crashed heavily into the cliff. It demolished the halfling giant stone and engulfed the surrounding area. The beach had been swallowed up, and the ocean continued to climb, moving closer towards us. This wild beast wasn't done until it caught up with us, all three of us, now exhausted, and, like a gazelle, tired out with all its energy, spent. It was ready to drop and resign its fate to the beast chasing after it. I knew it was just only seconds away before the wave would claim me and my two friends. Suddenly, my heart stopped beating. To my horror, I was unable to lift my leg up to a ledge. It had got entangled in some plant's tendrils. Bob and Michael were too busy escaping to not notice me in trouble. The water was now up to my ankles as I frantically moved my foot to budge it free. The boat just wouldn't move. By now, I resigned to the fact that I was going to drown. As a 26-year-old, I was hoping for longer on this earth, and I just wish Bob and Michael escaped the wave. The water was now rising up to my neck. I closed my eyes and saw flash images of my mother, dad, sister, and brother. But wait a moment. Why hasn't the water covered me yet? I thought. The next thing I noticed was the water level was going down. It was now down to my feet, and I was able now to budge my foot free. The water was drawing slowly away, down to where the ocean and beach would normally meet. I looked up to the top of the cliff, and there, looking down, were my two buddies, Michael and Bob, waving to me, laughing. We all had a miracle escape. Sadly, many tourists didn't. End nature or nurture. Sensitive content, serial killers. Nature or nurture? That is the question. Before today, I thought I knew where I stood on the issue. But now, friends, I am not really sure what to think. To give you context, a few weeks ago, after Mother passed, I was finally able to clean out her bedroom. The medical equipment was, of course, quite pristine, but the smell and debris from her glacial demise was simply overwhelming, and it took me days to clear paths in the room. I found the letters in her closet. Even now, it takes me a moment to adjust myself to the mental impact of those pages and pages of her precise Palmer script, describing in the most flowery of language a lifetime of barely requited love. The only mention of me in any of the letters was it, as in, I can get rid of it. My cold, sterile, demanding mother spent decades writing the most passionate and absolutely painful to read, lurid letters to her one-time lover who never once responded. The wrinkled envelopes I found in an old Avon perfume box, each bearing a scarlet ink, return to sender, returned from the Oklahoma State Penitentiary. I know it sounds ridiculous, but it just preyed on my mind, and I could not get the thoughts out of my head until I took action. Perhaps you may relate to this, perhaps not. So, friends, I eventually found myself in somewhat of a fugue state, an hour into the 2-hour drive up north from Dallas on 75 to US 69, which leads to Penitentiary Street, and then to the Big Mac, a maximum security prison once known for its annual prisoner rodeo, now infamous for its terrible conditions, riots, and death row prisoners, one of whom could be my father. To visit anyone at the Big Mac takes some time. Visiting someone like Louis Landry Reese takes time, and one's absolute forbearance for the most intimately probing of questions and fingers. It wouldn't surprise me if you hadn't heard of Louis Landry Reese and his swath of known and unknown rapes, kidnappings, and killings. But you will be able to find all you want with a few searches. Maybe you know exactly who he is. Driving under the peeling, white-arched grille Oklahoma State Penitentiary sign, buttressed by decaying, similarly painted, white bricks pillars, I pulled into one of the few designated parking spots for Big Mac visitors. I turned off the Volvo's engine and sat for a moment, perhaps a bit longer than a moment, with my mind ticking to different thoughts about how maybe today I would finally learn who my father really was, about how Mother would never talk about him, about how she would punish me when I kept asking and asking, and about how Brandy, my old receptionist, would tease me about Volvos being only for short-haired women who shopped at Home Depot. After a bit, the rising sun. Visitors to the Big Mac must arrive very early. Warmed up the air in the car to the point my face began prickling with sweat, and I was brought back from my reminiscing. I opened the door, swung my legs out, and made my way to enter the prison. As I mentioned, the passage from our daily world to that of people such as Louis Landry Reese is rife with probing exams, delays, and grunting guards who entertain themselves with snickering under the breath asides. In the Shawshankian depths of the Big Mac, the black and blue rayon bulk that was my escorting guard halted at metal door exactly like the dozen we had already passed. He turned back toward me and asked without much concern, "Are you sure?" It is true, friends. I am not a physically intimidating person. Not tall, not wide, not much hair, nor chin. With my decidedly pointed nose and very small teeth, Mother thought it the height of ironic hilarity that I chose the dental profession. A squealing mouse is what she called me, although, to be fair, I learned at a very young age that squealing no matter how much pain or discomfort, only prolonged such experiences. So squealing is something I have not done in a very long time. I stood straight and focused on how I was a respected professional, how I would be walking out of this dank hellhole of sweating brick and would never ever return, while Louis Landry Reese would only leave feet first. How I would finally find out the truth. "Open the door," I whispered. Greasy tendrils of hair leaked from his scalp, down his shiny face onto pale, meaty forearms, creating a tangled and ripped curtain through which I could see a silver blue eye cutting from me to the closing door of the room and back to me. As the door shut, he lifted his head up, and I was absolutely shocked to see his sunken and caved face with a navel of puckered mouth. Louis Landry Reese had no teeth, literally. Then I heard the strangest sound, like a dog choking and barking at the same time. It was me, laughing hysterically. Louis Landry Reese did not appreciate my levity. Friends, not at all. He tried to stand, but the chains around his wrist went through a steel loop, bolted to the table, kept him stooped over as he shouted at me. The harsh, ratcheting sound of the chains sawing back and forth through the loop assaulted my ears almost as much as his gummy-mouthed curses. The whole episode lasted only a few moments before a phalanx of guards rushed into the room, with one picking me physically up and setting me outside. To be frank, I do not really remember much too clearly from that point. I numbly followed the uniform in front of me and fuzzily collected my belongings before staggering into the Oklahoma sun. I made my way to the Volvo and began the drive back to Dallas. The shrieked words of my father still ricocheting between my ears, and he was indeed my father. One look at his face and those colorless, watery blue eyes that were identical to my own left no doubt, at least to me. I think Louis Landry Reese thought so too, even though he screamed the most terrible things about Mother and how I was just a dentist and not like the others, which is why I was so stunned and really driving on remote control until I got back to Dallas and pulled off Harry Hines into my driveway. The implications of Louis Landry Reese knowing my occupation meant he knew of me. But what did he know about me? I was thinking this over as I went to the basement to check on Brandy. She had finally stopped trying to pull her wrists from the restraints, but it seemed she had really stopped doing much of anything. Even when I clicked the pliers together, she barely trembled. That was disappointing. But since Brandy was down to her last 3 teeth, 16, 24, and 41, it was probably time to discharge her and find my next patient. I tell you all this, friends, because contrary to the rantings of Louis Landry Reese, I am not just a dentist. I am the dentist. And Louis Landry Reese also said the others. So, I am posting my story on this dark website as a message in the bottle to see if maybe I have family, others like me, to ask, what do you think? Nature or nurture? The whisper in the city. The dark skeletons of skyscrapers stretched into the twilight sky. I trudged along an empty street, my feet dragging through the damp sand, leaving deep grooves behind me. How long had I been here? I couldn't tell. The overcast horizon was slowly growing lighter, the mist thinning with each passing moment. The street seemed familiar to me, but any landmarks that might have been here before were completely effaced now. Everything around me was falling apart, disintegrating into sand that covered every inch of the ground. Suddenly, a soft, faint whisper came from somewhere in the distance. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen anyone else in this desolate place, so I shuffled toward the sound. The voice came again, this time a little closer and more insistent, but I still couldn't make out the words or pinpoint where it was coming from. I tried to pick up my pace, but the sand was dense and viscous between my toes. The whisper kept calling, getting clearer, as though someone was tuning a radio. It was soothing, but firm. I sensed it wished me no harm, at least as long as I did what it told me to. Finally, I understood what it was saying. "Come on, just a little bit further," the voice urged. It seemed like it was coming from a building to my right. I stared into the shadows in the gaping doorway that led into a dark hall. Nobody was there. I caught a reflection in one of the grimy shards of glass jutting from a window frame. Was it me? It couldn't be. How could I be this old and shriveled? I turned away and wandered toward the low horizon. "We need to get ready. Somebody is coming," the voice called from up ahead. A warm rain suddenly began to fall. It frothed in my hair and trickled down my cheeks. The air filled with a strange scent, something fresh and sweet. It didn't seem right. Rain shouldn't smell like that. The voice kept coaxing me forward, and I kept on wading through fragrant sheets of rain, my feet squelching in the soggy sand. After a while, the rain stopped, and the sky cleared a little, though the sun was still hidden behind the thick veil of clouds. The lukewarm mist curled around every turn, filling the streets that branched out from the crossroads I passed. If only it were clear enough to see what lay in the distance. Maybe then I could remember. Just as I reached the next junction, the whisper gave me a new command. "All right, let's get something to eat. Come on now. Turn here." I looked from side to side. Across the road to my left stood the remains of a diner. I plodded toward the building through the endless sand. I thought there couldn't possibly be anything to eat here. But as I stumbled over the threshold, I caught a whiff of toast and coffee. The diner was as decayed as everything else in this city. There was less sand inside than on the street, but it still covered the floor with an even layer. The display counter stood empty, the glass shattered. Here and there, overturned furniture lay scattered across the ground. The upholstery on the chairs and benches had rotted away a long time ago. The cup-shaped clock on the wall was missing its hands. Decay, dust, and sand. There was no one inside. Still, I heard muted whispers coming from every corner, buzzing like cicadas on a summer night. I moved through the room, trying to make out what the voices were saying, but there were just too many of them now. I shuffled through the jumbled chairs and tables to the center of the room. Here, on one of the tables, sat a plate of food and a cup of coffee. My stomach rumbled. There were no utensils, so I grabbed the food with my hands, stuffing it into my mouth. The toast was crunchy on the outside and soft on the inside. The omelet was fluffy and creamy. The coffee was strong and sweet. How long had it been since I had last eaten anything? I wasn't sure. It felt like ages. Suddenly, the air around me shimmered as though in a heat haze. The dilapidated diner faded away, and I found myself in a warm, sunlit kitchen. Light wood furniture, a crisp tablecloth, plates with delicate flower patterns on the rim. A woman stood in front of the stove. Her hair fell in neat waves, and she wore a light blue fit and flare dress. She turned to me and smiled. "Georgie, would you like another piece of toast?" she asked. Was she talking to me? Was that my name? I wanted to ask her what was going on, but before I could find the words, the mirage disappeared. I was back in the decaying diner, an empty plate before me. "Okay, George, you're done? Let's go now," the whisper cooed. I followed the voice back into the street. It kept urging me forward with its bright, incessant tone. Well, at least now I knew my name. But all the other questions still whirled in my head. What did the voice want from me? Where was I going? How long had I been here? Who was I? Really, it felt like this mess in my head would boil over, washing away all this dirty sand and all the debris of this dead city. I gritted my teeth, clenched my fists, and plowed forward. At last, the road led me to a park. Patches of grass poked through the sand. The trees, covered in yellow and red leaves, peeked through the fog, taunting me. A path lined with benches led into the mist. All right, let's sit down here. I settled onto the nearest bench. Quiet fragments of music fluttered to me from somewhere far away. The sound was comforting, familiar. The voice hummed around me for a moment before fading into the background. The music grew louder and steadier. I thought I recognized the melody, but couldn't quite put my finger on it. It reminded me of someone I used to miss. I sat alone, enveloped by the soothing blanket of music, staring at the colorful trees before me. Bit by bit, my angst and frustration melted away. After a while, I heard the whispers again. The voice that had been guiding me was talking to somebody else now. The new voice seemed familiar, like I'd heard it sometime long ago, in another life. I felt a movement in the air beside me. Someone touched my hand. Dad? Dad, it's me.
Chad.
The small room was tidy and clean. As nice as a room in such a facility could be. The curtains were open, and you could see a small park colored in gold and red by the approaching cold. An old jazz standard was flowing from the player in the corner. A woman sat on a stool beside an armchair where an old, frail man rested. She held his hand. "I'm sorry, Miss Ross. He's not having a good day today," a nurse said gently from behind the armchair. To be honest, they're few and far between now, and it's hard to say how many more he'll have. I know, but it's still so hard. It's like he's wandering further and further away, the woman said, wiping the corner of her eye. Dad, it's Katie. I'm here." His dry, thin fingers tightened around hers. The children of the forsaken. The villagers called them children of the forsaken. Those shunned to the Bear Claw Mountains, exiled from society. But the children called themselves the Watchers, for their view of the villages nestled in the valley below. And to their parents, they were merely Raya Navarium, Lilith Skyden, and Quill Weston. "Who in the Risen's name takes the forest path to Bearclaw?" asks Quill, features twisting as a gentle frown and harsh laugh compete for dominance, like wolves fighting over a kill. Lilith gives him the scolding look of a mother. "Don't say that. Mother says it's a bad word. I heard that the Risen will come take your voice at night if you forget to say your prayers." Though the Risen, fallen dead brought to life by the god of death, Vol.17, were more myth to faithless villagers than a poor, disease-ridden harvest. Amongst the forsaken, the ancient gods were sacred. Quill gives an assertive nod to Raya. "You were brought to the forsaken as a child. What do you think? Are we going to make another friend?" Raya's features may as well have been carved from stone, like the statues of the Risen in the underground temple below their feet. Her eyes are cast on the singularity in the distance, the cloaked figures cutting through the path against a blur of wind and snow, with the relentless endurance of a river's current. Raya was only a child when she was sent to the Forsaken. But as she grew, her past came back in fragments, like the shards of a broken clay bowl she'd accidentally dropped onto her foot trying to reach the table earlier this morning. Sometimes Raya prayed to Voltirum at night for the empty contentment of forgetting, to let her past die like all things in this world. But watching the figures, she supposed that there was a certain strength to remembering and enduring that was a part of living. I remember that the nun who heard me singing and saw me floating screamed and threw a book at me. I remember crying because I was confused more than hurt. Her face falls to her woolen boots covered in snow. I remember the thin cotton blanket that I shivered through all the way up to the mountains. I don't remember my father very much, except for the fact that he lived in a very big house and never seemed to be there. Quill squints through the haze, trying to see through the chaos of the storm. I don't see a child with them. Raya climbs atop a boulder with practiced movements, testing the heel of her boots against the stone for ice patches, and peers over the edge. I think you're right. Quill crosses his arms with false bravado. Of course I am. They're coming for us, but not for the reason we think. Raya turns to each of them and asks them the same question. How old are you? Quill is 10 years old. Lilith turns 8 next week. Raya is the oldest of them, almost 11. One of them wears the white robes of a priest. They were sent to cut our throats and take our voices too. Raya abandons her perch, staggering backwards. We're not even 16. Must have been a terrible harvest. Quill starts, before cut off by an elbow blow to his side. Lilith's voice trembles, and Raya tells herself that it is Lilith's teeth chattering from the cold, while Quill merely rubs the edges of his bony ribs. I need to tell Mother. She'll know what to do. Word of the priest's arrival and rumors about another nulling ceremony to take the voices of the children spread through the small town of Bearclaw faster than an avalanche. The children are kept safely behind locked doors and shuttered windows, while townspeople brandish an assortment makeshift weapons: knives, pickaxes, woodcutters' axes, shovels, old potions, and spell books. By the time the travelers arrive, the townspeople are ready and waiting. The children have been instructed to stay inside, stay away from the windows and door. But the coziness of the fireplace is almost stifling compared to the tenuous, cold, bitten air. Lilith turns away from the window, her eyes damp with tears. A few moments ago, her mother had forced her to look her in the eyes and wrote that if she could not be strong for herself, she must be strong for others. Her father, who mostly grunted in response to anything she said, hugged her and wrote that he loved her. Only now, Lilith started to realize that she would need to be strong for her people if her mother wasn't there to lead them. Huddled in the corner, hugging her knees against her chest, Raya tries to press her body flat against the wall to steady her trembling frame. Her mother wrote mutterings about the trouble that youth these days seem to find. Then she had stuffed firelight potions in the bag across her chest, wrapped another coat around her shoulders, and strung an amulet around her neck. Raya rubbed the markings on the rabbit bone, hoping there would be enough magic in the amulet to protect both of them. Meanwhile, Quill fights the urge to sneeze, itchiness crawling up his throat, threatening to explode. Earlier that evening, his father had taken out a gleaming, enchanted sword from a cabinet and donned the knight's armor that he'd stolen off a rotting corpse in a cave. When his father gave Quill the dagger that he used for skinning game, he wrote for Quill to protect the girls. At first, Quill wanted to point out that Lilith had been practicing her blood song, and Raya was a gifted illusionist. But taking in the hard lines of his father's saw, cast against harsh torchlight, Quill understood. His father also expected him to protect himself, prove himself. We're no priests, and we mean you no harm. The woman's weary steps sink into the snow, too loud and soft, at the same time like the toll of church bells, carried by the flurries of wind. Lilith's mother uses a pierce of charcoal to write on an empty page of her spellbook. Raya flinches at the groaning wooden beams of the cabin as the wind rattles the bolted shutters. Lilith inhales a deep, shaky breath, and Quill stifles his sneeze. I apologize for our deception. Only priests or knights are allowed to travel to the mountains. Tugging down the pristine pale cowl of his cloak, the man takes a step closer. We came here to warn you that your children are in danger. Are they well? Quill's father aims the tip of sword against the man's throat. The crowd gathered in front of the gates stands unwilling, unyielding against the wind. They lurk like a massive shadow, looming over the two strangers as the sun dips below the horizon. They want to take your children's ability to speak. As if sensing their prying eyes, watching from the window, the woman turns to the them, tugging at the man's cloak. Can we see the children? Please? Lilith's mother gestures towards Quill's father. With a heavy sigh, he drops the sword to his armored side. Raya's mother walks towards the door. All three of the children duck their heads down below the window, as if caught stealing maple sweets from the table, and glance at anywhere but each other in guilty silence. None of them flinch when there's a gentle knock against the door, as they follow Raya's mother in stunned, uncertain silence. The fickle, unruly wind seems to whisper in their place. Lilith tugs her thick cloak closer around her shoulders and straightens her shoulders to seem older than she is. Raya keeps her head lowered, focused on chasing her mother's shadow in a game of tag she's been playing since she was born. Quill trudges along, wearing his father's boots that are a few sizes too large for him. Kneeling on the snow, the woman flicks back her cowl. Her eyes are focused with concern. They said you were young, but they failed to mention you weren't old enough to bleed. Her gaze softens as she glances at Lilith. I have a daughter, Pyrrha. You remind me of her. The man turns to Quill. Do you know why we are here? Lilith glances at Quill, who in turn glances at Raya, their eyes locked in contest. A contest that Raya lost. Yes, she says, forcing the truth out of her mouth, harsh as the burning cold. A few hours ago, the priests sent knights to your village. They will arrive soon. We are offering to bring you to a safe place for a while. The woman meets Lilith's mother's gaze with deference. If your parents will allow us, Lilith's mother writes, we can protect our own. Why should we trust the kindness of a villager? Then Raya's mother follows. How do we know they will be safe with you? Quill's father hesitates before adding, where will you take them? When will we be able to see them again? The rest of the crowd lift their spell books in the air, messages scrawled in crooked, furious strokes that reminded Raya of the warning signs written with animal blood and placed before the forest path. You take our voices, our magic, and now you want our children? Leave. You are not welcome here. Lilith tugs on her mother's tunic sleeve, insistent, like a furry blood moon moth drawn to a candle. They're only trying to help. That's what the priests say, replies Quill, with an annoyed scoff. Rhea closes her eyes, trying to put up a mental fortress around her mind, blocking out the argument. She still remembered the long, tortuous walk from the church orphanage as she left the village. A man smelling faintly of bread spat on her feet. Someone wearing a silk dress called her a sorcerer, slut. When she tripped and fell on her feet, a rosy-cheeked child took the opportunity to throw rotten fruit at her back. Despite having a priest for company, Raya knew that she was alone. But when she opens her eyes again, the memory of the villagers fade, and all Raya sees are two people who ventured through the cold wilderness to protect 3 children they'd never met from knights. Standing alone, Raya addresses the crowd. I think that they've come all this way. We should at least hear what they have to say. My wife, Vea, has a sister that lives in a cottage on the other side of the sea in Whaley's Fair. Your children would be staying there. You could come visit whenever you wished, so long as you were not followed by knights. The man takes a step away from the crowd, giving them some privacy. Whatever your choice may be, we will understand. His eyes turn far more distant than the few paces between them. We know the loss of being separated from a child, as heated conversations fade to concerned murmurs, leaving torn messages from spell books crumpled and discarded in the snow. The parents turn to their children. One last message. It is your choice. Raya, Lilith, and Quill glance at each other, silently coming to an agreement. We'll go. The villagers called them children of the Forsaken, those exiled from society and their home in the Bear Claw Mountains. But the children called themselves the Watchers for their view of what others sometimes fail to see. To those who knew them, they were merely Raya Navarium, Lilith Skyden, and Quill Weston, the children who defied the silence of death like the Risen. I dreamed of heaven. There's a smell to death, and I'm not talking about the stench of rotting fat and escaping gases. It's the smell of death's presence. It changes the air molecules to make them sour. They slice your nose as you inhale, and they grate against your skin as you walk through its cloud. The effect lingers. The more bodies, the more intense it is. Like a heat map of last breaths, there wasn't a pure atom in the basement. It was suffocating. I was sitting against the wall. My dead eyes pointed to the sky, and my dropped chin pointed to Earth's core. My hands were blue, and my face was pale. My legs were twisted in such an uncomfortable way, but there was nothing I could do. Literally. I couldn't even breathe, because there was no breath to circulate, and my blood could no longer flow, because most of it was on the wall, so it seemed that I would be uncomfortable for eternity. But what's new? Even when I used to lay in the most comfortable position on a bed of clouds and fat puppies, it would only take an hour before I was forced to move again. Comfort is only a distant hope, after all, occasionally swooping down to give us a kiss on the cheek, only to fly away again. It offered a good chase, at least, but now it's gone, and it's never coming back. I can see its wings flap and flap, but its image only shrinks. Goodbye, little bird, and so my legs will stay. I don't even know who these people are next to me, beyond being an undesirable, of course. I always thought it would be my wife or children. Hell, even a neighbor in their place. But who are they? I don't know them. I've never seen them in my life, except maybe a passing glance or so. And yet, here they are. No one would ever want to imagine their coffin being shared with strangers. It's not fitting, I'll tell you that. And who pulled the trigger? I didn't recognize any of them either. When a man is put in such a position as I, isn't the smallest, most bare minimum honor you could give him is to at least let him see a familiar face before the black veil is draped. Even a simple photograph would suffice. Does their cruelty know no bounds? And what a disgusting day for it to happen. A clear, warm week ahead without a cloud on the radar. Yet they chose the only stormy day as the day. The rapping of the rain against the basement window was incredibly distracting, and all I had to do was stand still. I can't imagine the ruckus for the men with the job, but alas, it goes how it goes, just as it always does. Nothing new, nothing new. When my consciousness expired, there was a very bright light, just as you're told that you would see. It was like I was tied to the nose of a rushing train that was exiting a tunnel. I wasn't scared. I was intrigued, I suppose, but weary. It didn't seem like the light was growing as you'd expect, but it was still clear that we were bound to collide. And so we did. I then entered a still ocean, hovering over it, as if I was sitting on top of a floating rug. I looked around, and there was nothing that rose above the floor of shimmering water, completely level. I waited for some sort of figure to appear, an angel or guide, but no one came. I was alone. There was a thick white fog, more of a cream color, actually, and it was smothering everything, especially the horizon. The sky was the same color. I suppose it was more of a calm mist than a fog, if that makes sense. I stayed above the water, simply watching the mist, and I found myself entirely at peace. There was no tension or wonder. It felt right, natural, ethereal. Then the day succumbed to a wicked night. Everything was dark and ugly. But something in me knew everything was there, just as it was earlier. The water danced in an invisible moonlight, and due to the darkness, it was no longer water, but an eerie liquid. For the first time, I became aware of the possibility that the liquid might touch me, and it was terrifying. I couldn't say why. It's the same experience as seeing a familiar item in your bedroom turn into a demon when the lights go off. You know what it is and what it isn't, but you have nothing to prove it. And so, it was a demon. I found myself on the run again, but the reins were still out of my control. I soared through the dark mist to a sort of cave with a light echoing from its depths. Yet this light was only an illuminance in its vibrancy and not color. It was blacker than anything else in sight. You could shine the most intense beam of real-world light into the cave's exhaust, and the darkness would devour every ounce of it. There was no overshadowing its power. I was slurped into this cave like blood down a drain, and when I woke, I was surrounded by 4 things. They were human in their shape and size, but their faces and direct appearance were revolting, like bloody brain matter paired with the sensation of swallowing a razor blade. It's impossible to convey their grotesqueness, and they were in pain. They were suffering, whatever they were. I was lying flat on the cave floor, looking at them, all standing over me. They were studying me in teary-eyed horror. Just as I studied them, they were afraid and sad and grossed out. I was a brutal crime scene, and they were an innocent child. Their spirits yearned for an opportunity of hesitation, while their bodies functioned autonomously. They lifted me up like I was in a stretcher. Then they carried me through the cave, mostly keeping their vision to their path of travel, but occasionally sneaking a glance against their will at whatever I was to them. They placed me on a cold table and backed off, fighting themselves to sever the tie between their eyes and me. Then they were gone. All I could see was a wet cave ceiling. I knew a figure was next to me. I closed my eyes. It rolled its feet as it moved along my left side, doing seemingly nothing other than being present and busy. I don't know if it wanted me to open my eyes. It dared me to, but I would never. The ringing of complete silence was giving me the feeling of a terrible migraine. I couldn't relax because the figure was there, so I stayed alert and ready, as if there were some sort of instructions to be heard or questions to be asked. But there were none. No sound, no feel, only dread. Something was coming. Something was going to happen. It was racing to me. But there was nothing outside of the expectation of it to tell me. The figure paced. I didn't know what the figure looked like, and I would never dare to satisfy that curiosity. It wanted me to see it so that it could punish me, like a bully hovering in your peripheral vision, waiting for you to make eye contact so it could warrant abuse. But the figure, what abuse was in its arsenal? I was inflating with the shivers of dread, the heat of its vibrations cooking me like a bowl of popcorn. The figure was by my feet, my unprotected, naked feet. It wasn't doing anything yet, but of course, it was getting ready for something. Something big. I never realized how soft and sensitive the skin on my feet was until then. I expected the Lord to be here, but he wasn't. What are the rules if the rules I lived by didn't work? I don't even know if I had skin or a body or anything other than my perception. I would never open my eyes to see. If my skin was still attached, it must have shaken itself loose by now. Trembles of this magnitude would bring down even the strongest city. It's on my right side now. What's it doing there? Why there? My left side is empty, exposed, naked. There's fidgeting behind me. Metallic clinking, shuffling. But it's delicate and gentle. There's no rush to it, like an assassin taking his time to thread on a suppressor. His mind is in the clouds, and his hand is on the gun. How could one smile in a time such as that? The figure isn't smiling, though, I'm sure. It's all business for it, nothing more. A freezing chill tickles my scalp, near where the figure is hovering. What is it doing? Wait. It left. There's no door to close, but some sort of barrier is now between it and me. It's gone, but I can still feel it moving through the cave, as if I have a map of its layout. I'm alone. My eyes will stay shut. I've decided it. I'm not risking it. Not for anything. It'll come back. The figure, it'll come back without a doubt. It's getting something for me. I know it. But what? Or is that it? Is it done? Or will there be more? Has it even started yet? What is it? I don't know anything, but I know enough to not be ignorant. There's something coming. It's on its way. But why am I here? What is here? Does everyone go here? Oh, it's back. The figure is back.